All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Let me welcome you to our webinar this month. We're going to be talking about negotiating better change orders, agreements, and better project decisions. And so we're going to be talking about kind of a wider range of different aspects of this because you've got so much negotiation that you have as a project manager when you're talking about change orders. So it's not just talking about contracts, even though there could be a piece of what we talk about that fits for it. We just negotiate in almost everything we do, whether it's with the customer or with management or even with our team members over different aspects. But we also spend a great deal of time with this issue of change orders, and our projects have a tendency sometimes because of these change orders to get out of balance for some reason with some of these things. So one of the things that we want to look at today is, let me give you a few objectives of what we're going to be dealing with today. We want to talk about understanding negotiation strategies to use when discussing change orders, analyzing agreements and adjustments which support project goals and outcomes, and evaluating decisions and solutions without bias. And all of these have a tendency to challenge us because we are biased. We do have our own mindset, our own decisions for so many different things. And so all of those do cause some kind of concern or problem with some of that. All right, so let's start off with looking at reasons for change orders. So let's start with change orders because that's something we live in every day. Three main reasons that pop up normally when we're talking about change orders. And what we're looking at is inaccurate estimates or scope could cause change orders to happen. New decisions, obviously, which the customer has or that have just evolved because of the project, or also unknown risk events that are starting to come up that cause us to have to create change orders or workarounds or some kind of contingency strategy that we didn't know about. The point is that in all of these can create an enormous amount of changes. And so the problem is not that we're not going to have changes. Most of our projects have change orders, and most of our projects, we handle the change itself, the new piece of work, normally relatively good. The problem is that so many times it's that discussion or that negotiation between us and the customer to try to be able to see what the customer wants and to be able to push back on the customer sometimes when they're wanting something that's out of balance or over the top. Many times with all of the change order issues that we get into, people want change orders, but they don't want to change their budget. They don't want to change their due date. I'm sure you've been in those situations as well. And of course, that's not realistic for project management. And so to have that happen over and over again in a project is what's causing the enormous scope creep that we've all seen. And you have an unhappy customer at the end. And so we're going to talk about a couple of little activities or principles that will maybe help you a little bit. So let's talk about negotiation strategies for change orders themselves. When you look at projects that have gotten out of control, almost every situation that we get into, when you go into the recovery efforts of trying to pull that project back around, it brings us into that situation to where how are our projects, how did they get to that point in the first place? Most recovery efforts find that negotiation or lack of change control has contributed to the project getting out of control. Now, it's not always the whole main reason, but it has definitely contributed to it. Now, let me stop just a second. I'm hearing some kind of overtone here. If your microphone is on, do you mind turning that off? It might be me, and so that way I can kind of see if is it me. How many of you are hearing overtone, some type of kickback or a little bit of a growly stuff? Several of you? Okay. All right. That's what I thought. I was hearing that too. So let me see. Okay, so everybody's got their microphone off. So let's see if that's me. If it's me, that's going to be trouble for you as you go through here. So let's start. So with change orders, that's what you're looking at. In recovery efforts, one of the first places they look at for recovery is, okay, were change orders kind of out of control? And so I want to talk to that a moment because a lot of times you do change orders the way everybody does change orders in your company or organization, and sometimes that might not be the best thing. So here's some of the things of being able to understand how to negotiate. Negotiation, whether it's real light, like what we might have in change orders or with our team and with management, or whether it's real heavy, like what it might be when we're talking about negotiating contracts. The point is, some of these same basic skills, it just depends on the depth of that skill we need. And so negotiation creates more substantial project outcomes, builds stronger relationships with stakeholders, reduces conflict over choices and constraints, can fix small issues before they get larger, together, and we've seen that all happen for sure. And it lays a foundation for a positive work environment. So what PMI talks about when they talk about negotiation is a lot of times what we would even call a discussion. It might even be so light that it's not even part of our mindset to think that it's going to be negotiation, because what you're looking at is just basically a discussion with the customer, a discussion with management. But what PMI would say is that all of that, where you have two opposite viewpoints, would be under that umbrella of negotiation. So we talk about the reasons for negotiation. So incomplete scope. So let's talk about it a little bit deeper. With an incomplete scope, we mean that we did not gather all the requirements up front. Sound familiar to anybody else? I know it does, because we've all been in this situation. The people who interviewed the customer and developed the scope of work thought they had everything. We planned the plan to that scope, but as we started executing, that's when you start realizing, you know what, we didn't get it all. There's still this area over here that we've missed. This project's going to have an interaction to another project. And so many of you have talked about this in class at different times. So you find yourself having to go back and redo the scope of work because we missed a chunk of it. It could have been incompetence, could have been lack of training. It could be that, you know what, we just didn't know what we didn't know. Okay. And those happen. You also sometimes will have optimistic estimates. Now, optimistic estimates that we're talking about, meaning that people estimated the project, but they did it as if it's the only project you're working on. They did it as if they've got control of those resources the continuous time through the project. And of course, most of those things are not true. And we see that happening with our projects. So what happens is that if I'm doing just one project, maybe I could do it in that amount of time. But the challenge I get into is that I've got 5 projects on my plate and my people are rotating among projects, and we haven't taken into account crisis times. So we've gotten optimistic on our estimates. We should have given more time. If I've got 5 projects, I've got to put more time in for something going wrong on any of those 5 that's going to take my personnel away. A new customer direction. We've all seen this. Customer decides to go in a new direction. They see something new, or Lord help us if they talk to a salesperson. You know, don't we all see that as well? And so they've decided they want this new feature, this new function, and they want to add this. And of course, the customer's position is it's not going to take that long, or it's not going to do that much to the project. And of course, it normally does. And then, of course, the last is that undiscovered risk. That undiscovered risk is one of those that a lot of times we can think about a lot of things that could happen, but the point is there's always going to be something that we didn't know about that project, something that of how it's going to function, what it's going to influence, what it's going to impact. And sometimes what happens with some of these is personnel changes. For an example, let's say you're doing this project for your customer and all the leadership at your organization changes. Wow, let me tell you something. Your scope is probably going to adjust a little bit because you've got new leadership there. And you're going to see some of these things happening if you're not already seeing that. So when you're trying to determine how fast I can do a project, you've got to do a lot of different pieces to this. And so you'll notice here at the top, we do it fast. When we can do it fast, we're going to have high knowledge of that project. So for those of you who do projects that are very similar, you're able to do it probably the fastest of anybody in the world for that project for your organization, because you've already done 3 of these. So what happens is your team's on target, project manager knows what's going on, and so you can do it faster. Why? High knowledge. We've already done this thing several times. The challenge that we're going to see, though, is we're looking at low knowledge and doing it slow, because we're learning as we go. Nothing wrong with learning as we go. We all do that in certain areas of any project. But the challenge is that we sometimes want to make decisions fast, and yet we have low knowledge. I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you saw this come out on the news this week, but on the news this week, there's a new piece of software that connects with AI. And educators and colleges, universities across the country are just shocked over this, because it is such a good piece of software that it actually writes what it thinks you're wanting to say ahead of time. And so it's just a whole new level, a new caliber of writing software. And so they demonstrated it on the news. And so, you know, your news anchors have to write everything. And so they start it by some of the things they say, and it was finishing things out, and the news anchors were just watching it type. And it was not to the level that a news anchor would have all the specifics, but the general concept was very good and very close. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's that going to do with all the universities and all the colleges? And because, you know, kids are going to use this stuff, young people are going to use this to be able to write something. And this piece of software is writing it and really getting a good concept. So if we were trying to implement a piece of software that's brand new, any piece of software, low knowledge of that software and how it's going to interact could be very interesting for some of those things. The other side of this, you'll notice you need less time, more time. The less you know, the more time you need. Brand new technology, never done it before, never done it at your organization before. Guess what? It's going to take longer. Your team doesn't even know what's going on. It's going to take a learning curve for some of this. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's really the way things are going to go. And so you'll see when you start looking at all of this, once again, if we have high knowledge, we've done it a lot, you can do it much faster. Absolutely. You know the shortcuts. New stuff, you're not going to know those shortcuts. Now, one of the pieces that you have to look at when you're talking about coming to an agreement of some things focuses on this idea of areas of agreement. And sometimes when we do this, you've got great people you're working with. And so the position of person A, the position of person B in areas of agreement when we're negotiating about something, a lot of times that's going to be very easy to do and very complementary. And so in other words, it's not like the used car salesman form of negotiation, because you don't have that kind of constraint on both sides. Both parties are wanting to come to some kind of agreement. However, on the flip side of this, when it's opposite and person A has a totally different view than person B, you might find yourself not being able to agree as much because of what's getting ready to happen. We've had customers just recently who are starting to put freezes on training because of the economics. And so one of the people that contacted us made a statement that, we don't have a contract. And I'm thinking, okay, a contract is good. And obviously we've got to have contracts. But when you start getting into bad economy and bad things, the contract is really kind of a secondary issue in some cases. You find yourself trying to work with the customer to be able to help them get what they want. And yet the thing is that the timing has changed. Their money obviously has changed, and the entire project could be canceled if we're not careful with it. So you find yourself with person A, maybe those changes that has changed compared to what they thought they were going to get in that agreement. So now the agreement's going to have to change in order to accommodate some of those things. So you'll find some of these, depending on what the situation is, when that agreement's going to change, when the agreement does not need to change. Okay, so with that, you understand negotiation strategies for change orders. So change orders, we kind of do them based on how we've been trained to do them within our organization, okay? So we get into our organization and we see how someone else handles it. We handle it very, very similar. And what I would ask is if there's any problems with your change orders, then this is probably not a big deal. Most people have trouble with their change orders, lack of documentation or lack of follow through, or they have people who forget that they wanted that change. And so what happens is the scope gets creeped. And since there's a repercussion to that scope, now all of a sudden everybody gets amnesia and they don't want to admit that they actually wanted that change order. So we know change orders are common in traditional projects. Now, if you're doing Agile or Scrum, all of you know that change orders is there to accommodate Agile and Scrum. That's why you're doing it, is so that you don't have the documentation. It's going to be very verbal. It's going to be very easy for the team to make adjustments. The product owner is going to make the adjustment that the customer wants. That's why you're doing it in Agile or Scrum. And then some change orders follow a traditional, very specific process of gaining approval from a change control board. So the customer or somebody wants a change, you fill out a change request form, it goes to a change control board, they say yes or no, and then you adjust the project plan based on that. Now that's great, but most of us don't have that formal change control process. And sometimes it comes back to bite us because we don't have that. Other changes could be verbal from management or from the customer. You're walking down the hall, they catch you, they want to change, and the verbal is good enough. Now, let me just throw a couple of things in that will help protect you a little bit on this. If you're having trouble with change orders and too many change orders, or people are not, being stand up about asking for some of these change orders, or not realizing what it's going to cost or the impact it's going to have to the schedule, a couple of little adjustments can help you. Even if you are in an organization that has a very relaxed atmosphere, nothing wrong with that, okay? Nothing wrong with that at all. But if you have a very relaxed atmosphere, one of the things that you could do when the customer catches you in the hall and says, hey, we want this change, is to listen to them, talk with them a little bit about it. And then when you go back, look and see what that impact of that change is going to be. Now you say, well, we don't have documentation. I get it. I get that. But you're still wanting some type of email or documentation to where you've connected that person to that change. And so you can send back to that person something very light and very easy sounding that says, hey, we talked about the change. Looks like it's going to add 3 days and it's going to be $3,000. And so we're going to be putting this into place this afternoon if you still want us to do this. What you have done with that email, even though it's a very friendly, calm, easygoing email, is not only have you connected it to that person, but you've also told the ripple effect of what that change order is going to be. And the reason for that is to let the customer know that you're giving the change, but here's what it's going to do to that project. If you're a group that doesn't track the money, then show what it's going to do to the schedule, or show what it's going to do because you're going to have to bring another SME in to be able to do that, or another programmer in who's going to have specialization in that area. All of that changes the whole dynamic of what you're doing. And now your customers are getting additional information rather than asking for a change order and then being shocked at the end of the project of something happening. So just a little thing that will help you. Try not to negotiate, though, on something, especially if it's very substantial, until you've had time to research it. And so that's what you're really looking at. What is the impact of this? A lot of times people think, well, this little change is not going to be a big deal, but you find out, man, this thing's huge because it taps into other things. And those of you who work for state government or federal government, you know what I'm talking about. This little change doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you start tapping into all these different databases that it's got to talk with, this change is huge because now you've got 5 things that have to change so that it still talks to the databases you wanted to talk with. So you find that happening in projects over and over. And I don't see that getting better because technology is getting more advanced. Change orders happen quickly. Negotiations can happen in the hallway. Project managers must delay some change order discussions until they know the impact it has on all areas of the project. And the reason why I kind of walk through verbally what was that little situation in the hallway is because that seems to be a very common culture for people running projects, especially your internal projects. You have internal customers and it's very relaxed. So what you're trying to do is you're setting a culture that reports back to the customer with the adjustments of the time, the cost, the scope to help build the right atmosphere. Those changes can be accommodated, but everybody knows it's taking more time and more money in order to do that. And it gave you an email documentation. Even if you don't have a change control board, it still gave you that email documentation. Now, here's some of the challenges that we do get into with change orders. Change orders are going to adjust the scope, budget, or timeline of the project. Now, sometimes people don't track the budget. Some management tracks it, or sometimes people are not tracking really the scope of the project. They're tracking just the schedule. Well, all of these components kind of hook together, as you already know. And so what happens is I can't change my scope without it adjusting my budget or my timeline. It's going to do some of those, impact some of those some way. So when making a change, it helps to look not only at the current change, but also at the ripple effect. And that's ripple effect is what we get into. The current change looks good. The customer talks about the current change. We don't see any problem with the current change, but as you evolve that change on out to all the other pieces of the project, that's where you see that it impacts those other project areas in some manner that takes additional time. So prior to a meeting about maybe a change order, the project manager needs to spend some time thinking about the adjustment, create estimates for new direction. But the problem with our last bullet point here, as I know in many of your cultures, you didn't know about the change order ahead of time. They caught you in the hall, they asked you about change order, and now you're trying to follow up with them about that change order. And so that's where the email, that easy email comes in, of being able to say, I looked at it, this is what it looks like it's going to do, and we can put that into play starting this afternoon to go in that direction. All of that kind of covers your buns on some of these issues of change orders. They always have an element of risk associated with them, so you always have to take that into account. If what's being asked as a change order is involving something new technology, something that's never been done before, you don't know everything about that. You know about the change, but you still don't know about the ripple effect of that change. And so the risk could be due to the addition of new work or solutions which are untested with the current project team, or even with the current system or organization that you're putting together here. So it's all brand spanking new. And of course, we're all seeing how some of these things have that effect. All right, so the dynamics of project changes. As we know, you've got your project, and so it could impact your business process because now we've got to do it differently because of the change. Could impact your risk analysis because you've got to do it differently. It could impact your cost and schedule and impact analysis. All of these are part of the dynamics of change. Now, some organizations have purposely shifted their organization, and they've used that as a marketing ploy to be able to make themselves different. Think of some of these coffee shops. I don't know where you live, if you've seen any of these coffee shops, Seven Brew or some of these newer coffee shops that are trying to compete with Starbucks. Starbucks has built basically a brick and mortar store. People come in, they buy their coffee, and so they've built that atmosphere there. Some of these other companies that are out here in Springfield, we've picked up a couple of these coffee shops, and so what they have done it from the aspect more of a drive-through, like a Sonic would do. And so you're driving through, but they have also picked up and borrowed from Chick-fil-A. And so you have all these people with all their little iPads out here, and they're taking orders, and you've got lines, 2 or 3 lines of cars going through to do this. So they have purposely changed their business processes to set themselves across, and they accommodate a lot more customers running through this. And so it's just fascinating to me to see the line at this coffee place, 2 and 3 lines lined up to get coffee, and how they have done this to stand out. So in their case, they made a change order, or they made a change in their business environment from the process standpoint to process their people differently. Now across town, there's another new franchise, and they don't have anybody. They're trying to piggyback off of what everybody else is doing. Their coffee must stink because you don't see many people there. But the Seven Brew is packed out. So you see people are thinking about it, looking at it differently, but they have purposely made a change in the beginning of their company from the process standpoint to stand out. Now let's go into impact analysis. Here, these are a series of questions that we need to ask ourselves. Those of you who've been project managers for a long time, you know the song and dance of project management. You're a good project manager because you've gotten caught between the rock and a hard place at times. And that's how most of us became good project managers. Things went wrong. We had some kind of something went haywire, and we were trying to plug the holes. And so here's some questions to consider when you're trying to analyze something, the impact of a change or the impact of what this decision is. Will new risks surface due to the change? And in most cases, it would be new, it might just be different, and you can accommodate those. But normally risk will adjust a little bit based on the change. More substantial the change, normally the difference, the number of risk will change. Will new problems or issue arise due to the change? So we make this change, but what's that going to do to everything else? Will the change create a new opportunity for the product or the project? So we create the change, but now what's going to happen? Is there new possibilities? We're going to be able to provide new value to the customer in some particular way. Is this going to be a new product that will actually allow us to be able to market it separately or to be able to produce it? Will this change impact the supplier or vendors we support? And so you'll see that a lot of times with change orders. Those of you who are in fixed price contracts probably have noticed that when you have a change order, guess what? Cha-ching, the vendor, and you're doing it with a vendor, the vendor charges you for that. Will the change impact the contract or legal commitments? And many times that's one of the reasons why we struggle with changes and have such a formal change control, is because not only are you paying for the change, but you're going to pay that vendor some type of fee for a change request and for them to grant that. Will this change impact the due dates or the critical path? In many cases, it will, because it's going to take more time unless you're able to put more resources on it, assuming that makes a difference, and it might make a difference on your critical path. Will it impact the duration of the activities? Could. Will it change the impact of the recovery plans or contingencies which have already been put into place or planned? All of that could adjust as well. So you're wanting to run this down. And so the art of project management, as you well know, is you're trying to outthink the problems. You're trying to stay several weeks ahead of what could go wrong that could cause our people on our team to hit some kind of impediment or some kind of snag. And so you're always trying to think ahead. And the best project managers, and you already know this, you're always thinking ahead. What could go wrong? You're seeing problems that people haven't even talked about yet because you're always trying to forecast out what's going on with them. All right, so let's talk about determining the type of change. Now, we all know that some change orders are kind of Mickey Mouse. It's not a big deal, okay? And I get it. And so let's call that a minor change. It's defined by each organization. And so what you call a minor change, somebody else might think is a major change. But I'm going to give you some examples just to get you thinking. And these examples might not fit you at all because of the amount of money and time your changes would be. So it's sometimes determined by a certain level level of change, maybe in hours or in dollars, okay? So a minor change. We've all had this. Somebody wants something changed. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's really pretty low key. And so we make that little adjustment. It's not a big deal. And so I put down under 25 hours and $3,000. Now that might be a monstrous change based on your projects, and it might not even, you wouldn't even hiccup over 25 hours and $3,000 because your projects are monstrous in cost and size. But I just want you to see what I'm talking about. Some amount of hours and some amount of money that we would say, okay, that's a minor change. That's really, and we don't anticipate this is going to do much to the budget or to the schedule. A major change would be defined by anything which is over whatever your designated baseline is. And so normally it requires more evaluation, authorization for management. And so what it would be that number of hours that it would take to make that adjustment and that minimum amount of money. And so that major change is the one you're really wanting to spend the time on, because that's going to have an impact, and your organization looks at it as having an impact on that project, okay? So whatever that is, that's going to be the one that knocks your socks off. And so that's always going to be the change that you're really wanting to be able to hang on to and understand. But if you're not measuring what is considered a minor and minor, medium, and major, then that might be a discussion that you want to have, because every change can't be looked at as minor. And the reason I pointed this out is because some people have some major changes that they're still treating like a minor change. And that's probably not the right discussion that we should be having. So change orders, then, that brings us into that. If we're doing traditional project management, you have some type of change order. So as a project manager, you might be presenting the positives and negatives of a change order, and it can put the project manager in the best position for controlling the next steps. Here's the positive of making that change. Here's the negative. And negative is almost always going to involve risk, schedule, and budget. Risk, schedule, and budget. And you need to be glad that does, because that's where management is going to make that determination. If this is going to cost them $50,000, it's going to be far different than if this is going to cost them $3,000. So being able to say this is what it's going to do to the schedule, 15 days is a bigger deal than a day and a half. And so you want to be able to come back with some of that, not fictitious numbers at all, but you're wanting to be able to do this. Project managers who agree with the customer's changes can also recommend they go forward with the changes. And so when you'll see this, where you think there needs to be a change, customer agrees, and so you see that tag team effort, and that helps. The project manager's recommendation builds on the foundation of their expertise, their research. And so you're not just making a recommendation off the cuff. You're making a recommendation based and supported by the evidence of what the calculations are going to be. And that's always going to be a better stance for you to be in. So what do you do when change orders do not benefit the project? And we've all seen this, where we have those project changes, and it doesn't really benefit the project. So here's a couple of ideas. One would be research all the areas of the change, the impact it has on the project, the team, the budget, the timeline, and the organization. Because in that, you probably are picking up on some of the substantial pieces that you would need here. Only after research is complete should the project manager be open to negotiating the change or other options. And the reason why we say this is because that research piece is one of the pieces that we don't do. We negotiate a lot of this off the cuff. And a lot of times that's what makes the difference here, is that we don't really know how long or what the impact of this is going to be. We're just pulling it from the top of our head. And we've all gotten in that situation before. I mean, I know how that works. But what you can do is you can change your verbiage to when you talk about this, you can say, well, it doesn't sound like a very major change. Let me go back and put a pencil to it, and I'll send you an email shortly, and with what we think the timing is going to be, or what we think the cost is going to be, or what changes this will have in the risk. And what that does is that adjusts everything a little bit in the mindset of the customer, to where you're making educated guesses and educated forecasts, not just shooting from the hip. Also, come to the meeting with other recommendations. You know the customer's wanting certain things. Do you have another recommendation? Do you have a recommendation, especially that's been researched to the point that theirs has? So it needs to support a better solution and outcome that the customer is proposing, but a different approach. Many customers will be very open to that. Listen to the customer's desires and reasons for the change. Use that information to help position the new solution. And then remember, customers want what they want, but they also do not want to make a major mistake with any area of the project. And so you're the person who's protecting them from making a mistake because they made a wrong decision and they're not going to get the right outcome. And so your recommendation should be something that's a little more cautious sometimes, because yours is waiting for research and data. And once that atmosphere gets built, you've got a better relationship with your customer, and you've got more recommendation power with that customer. You're recommending based on what we see, this is the one that seems to be better. People are having so many problems with this other tool or this other technique or this piece of software. And so we're wanting to be able to make this recommendation. We think this will fit what you're wanting to do better. And that's going to help. Now, if you're using a business analyst, some of the time, some of this research that we're talking about here, your BA might actually be doing some of the analysis for some of this. So for those of you who have that structure, then you'll notice that you're kind of tag teaming sometimes with your business analyst for some of the change orders. Also, once the negotiation's over and a change request is agreeable, confirm it at least with an email and any other document that you're supposed to, because what you're wanting, you don't want all of these agreements to just be up in the air. I thought it was interesting. I attended a faculty meeting at the university for over doctoral students, and that was what the program director was saying. You're making a lot of agreements verbally. They need to be in writing at some point. And it doesn't have to be a lot of writing, but it needs to be in an email. It needs to be in writing so that you can go back to those and know that you've told the student to do these things in writing, and the student didn't hear it or didn't agree with it. It's not just up in the air. And I thought about the program we were going to do this Friday. We're kind of in the same boat. You're wanting some kind of little bit of documentation. So email and documentation adjust to the amount of formality of your organization or your PMO or what your project requires. So those of you folks who have such a a loose kind of atmosphere, no, we're not wanting 20 pages of documentation. That's silly. Or if you normally do small projects, you don't need that level of documentation. But in emails telling the customer, yes, you're going to do this, and here's what's going to cost in money and time, could be of value to your situation. And so that email at least gives you that email trail to where you're showing what's happened. So what you're really doing is you're shifting the position from the current, maybe the current agreement of what it is, and transitioning them to that future agreement. Also, that's what they're trying to do to you when they're asking for a change request. And so your goal is not just to be, contrary and everything's no, because that's not realistic in a project, because you're a tag team effort in trying to do what the customer wants. But at some time, but it doesn't mean that just somebody just mentions something they want and they get it for free, and they get, it creeps the scope and creeps the budget and creeps the timeline. And it's all based on, well, it's the team's problem and the team's fault. The reason why some of that's happened was based on the customer wants and their desires. Now let's talk a little bit about decision making, because that's what you're doing, is making decisions. You've got team member A, team member B. We've got a lot of ideas. And so what happens is the more we talk, and that's what this is representing, the more we talk, we decrease the options or the ideas that we think are appropriate. So we come in with a lot. That you see the back end of both of these, it's very large. And so we come in with a lot of ideas that we think is going to happen. The more we talk or negotiate, PMI would call it negotiate, the decreasing of the options that we have, because it doesn't fit for some reason. And then hopefully when we get down here to the end, there is an agreement that we've come to be able to pull this together. Now, I will tell you that none of this works with my grandkids, because they want what they want, and it's hard to get them down to that decreasing option sometimes. So sometimes they just win regardless of where the discussion starts. But in projects, we're probably trying our best to get it down to where we both are agreeable with this. And so that brings us within that span of what are we talking about. And so once again, you and your team, and you've got experts in your team who have insights into this, so don't hesitate to pull from them as well. Now, analyzing agreements to support the project outcomes. Remember what your main project outcome is. Sometimes your change orders and sometimes what the customer wants might actually disregard some of those ultimate outcomes for the project. So you want to always be looking at, yes, what this is going to do to my project right now, but you've got to be looking at the output of this. If we make this change, is that going to change the output of what this project is? Something the customer is banking on happening by the time they get this. So as you analyze agreements, now the word agreement, PMI has used that term very almost like a generic term to account for all their contracts, all their agreements, service level agreements, but also they would even include in their phones, text agreements, email agreements, any kind of agreement would be under this broad umbrella here. But the point of it is that, and even rightly so, if I send you an email and I agree to something, or I tell you we will do something, you're counting on that happening. And I should be a person of my word to be able to come through with that. And if I can't come through with that, I should be a person who has, who has integrity enough to send you an email and say, hey, let me just say, this is what's happened, and I'm not going to be able to fulfill this until then. And so all of that puts it under that big umbrella of agreements here. What you're doing and what you're trying to do is remove that ambiguity. Ambiguity kills us in projects. So removal of the ambiguity in the agreement, whatever the agreement is. For an example, you've asked people to do something. Do we leave it open-ended when we ask people to do something? Can you get this done? Yes, I can get it done. We never, sometimes some of us maybe never asked, when will you get it done? Or can you get it done by Thursday? And so that ambiguity, the person says, well, you just said, could I get it done? But you didn't give me a due date. Well, that told you that that conversation had ambiguity in it. So the more we can remove some of this ambiguity, the better it helps us as a project manager. And once again, you'll feel better about it as a project manager because you're anticipating this is going to be done by Thursday and Barbara's going to have hers done by next Tuesday, she thinks. And you can handle mistakes. You can handle things didn't play out. I get it. Okay. We all do. But what you want is you still want that projection in your mind. So ambiguity leaves room for conflict or disagreement. I'm thinking faster than what you were thinking. And conflict has a way of disrupting the project and cause delays, because what happens is we have these minor issues suck down our time because we're debating or waiting on somebody. And once again, my perception was different than yours. Specifics reduce any of these problems. And so when and where can I be more specific on my due dates, on what I'm asking people to do? Ambiguity is one of the killers of some of this. And so you're going to want to watch that. The other side of this is something that many of you are probably pretty good with, asking what, how, and why questions. You are a question person. A question is better than a statement because a question is normally looked at as being softer than a statement. So for an example, I can ask you a question of, do you think you can have this done by next Thursday? Compare that to, I need it by next Thursday. Now, there are times where you don't ask a question, you need it by next Thursday. But anything that you can ask a question on, it comes across to that person as much softer. And so think about it and play with some of your questions. And so what questions help identify or define terms, conditions, desires of the actor? Why questions help the person or group get deeper information or ideas about what's coming next? And how questions show the steps of the process. And so once again, when you're looking at some of your questions, you're trying to use these to help nail some things down. That's one of the reasons why at the end of all of our meetings, and especially virtual meetings, we want to make sure everybody understands what's the next steps. And I'm writing a program right now about managing virtual and remote projects and teams. And that's one of the big gaps that we see in the research, is that people don't know what's going on. They leave the meeting and everybody's got a different perception. You want to remove that perception by just asking, what's our next steps? Can we have it by next Thursday? Is that realistic or not? Just ask the question rather than assume that you're going to get it next Thursday and that everybody knows. Also, how do individuals make their decisions? I've asked that of organizations, and you find out that there's a decision-making pod out here that you never even thought about. You might find that out about your customer. You might find that out even about your vendor. How does the vendor company that you're having to work with make their decisions? Because once again, that's going to tell you who the actors are that you're going to need to connect with if there's a problem. How should individual or groups make decisions? How do people act during the negotiations? And you'll see people have a whole different kind of behavior, body language, when they know that they're negotiating over something. And sometimes people walk in that mode, as you know, and sometimes they walk in very friendly, or they walk in, with the barriers up, and they're wanting to you're not going to get through that barrier. How could people act during the negotiations? Now, most of the negotiations we're talking about here with change orders and customers and internal people, we want that to be very, very friendly. We want to be calm, and we don't want it to be a threatening kind of situation. Even though sometimes some of these things might escalate to where the behavior and the actions change. But once again, your negotiation boundaries should always be, at least on the initial stage, friendly, approachable, the ability to talk through these things. And then 99% of your negotiations are going to run like that. You're not going to have this escalation path in some of these cases if you can do it that way. Now, comparing potential decisions. So determine if decision A would be better than decision B, or determine if there's another decision that's better than decision B. So this sounds like a no-brainer, but here's the thing that you get into. Sometimes when your customer wants something, they've already talked to a salesperson. As you know, you see this all the time in technology. You guys get caught in this all the time because your customers talk to a salesperson who sold them on this piece of software, let's say. And so that piece of software they've been told by the salesperson, nobody has ever had any problems with this thing. And of course, you know, that's a bunch of phooey, but many times they've already been sold on it. They want that piece of software, and now they're bringing, let's say IT, they're bringing IT in on that. Worst time to bring you in after they've already bought it. And so they've spent thousands on this thing, and you're coming in as the bad person saying, guess what? That doesn't work in our system. Or all of these features here don't work in our system because of all the restrictions we have. And so a lot of times that creates that tug of war that we're talking about here. Determine if there's another decision that's better for decision B. And so what happens when you get into these situations where somebody has already listened to a salesperson, and especially if they've already bought it, then you're giving them part of those features that they thought they were paying for, but they're not getting them all. And of course, IT gets blamed for the whole thing. And you're thinking, wait a second, these folks knew nothing about the software until it was purchased. I mean, they were secondary tier of people that were brought in. We should have had IT in up front. But we get that in all kinds of things where we will bring other people in late after we've already made some decisions that have really already dictated the direction we've got to go. The other piece would be evaluating potential decisions. Strength of decision A compared to B. What are the trade-offs, potential losses? We're having to look at every piece of this. Excuse me just a second. Let me cough for just a second. I apologize. I've got a terrible cough since Christmas, and so it just kind of comes on me. So fortunately, I felt it that time, and you didn't have to hear it, and the video didn't have to hear it at that point. But what are the trade-offs, potential losses? Everything can't be positive in a change. You're going to lose functionality. You're going to lose something. You're going to lose some kind of dimension by making that particular change. And then you'll see behavior ploys. And so this is some of the things that people don't like about real negotiation. Hendel in his book Negotiating Skills talks about behavior ploys, and he says dealing with behavior ploys: confused negotiator, an indecisive negotiator, aggressive negotiator, or an emotional negotiator. And he presents these behaviors from these four standpoints. That was really good because it presents a person in four different stages or four different frameworks, and it makes a difference on what they're going to say. And we have to deal with them a little bit differently in some of these cases. And so the confused negotiator, they don't know really what's going on, maybe not even sure why they're there. We've all heard that. Why do I need to be part of this meeting? And yet we're talking about a substantial change. Indecisive negotiator, not sure if they want to or don't. And yet you've got to have that customer make that decision in order for you to be able to do something with that change. And then you've got the aggressive negotiator a lot of times who's just kind of laying the law down. A lot of times they'll have position power, but they are definitely, it doesn't make any sense why we don't do this. I can't even believe this is being talked about. And then you've got the emotional negotiator, and the emotional negotiator can run the full gamut of emotion. They can portray that they're hurt that they even have to come to a meeting and discuss this, or it could be that they are so passionate about it that this is the only positive way it could be. So we have different behavior ploys. If you were going out to purchase a car today, you probably have a behavior that you have in purchasing cars, and many people do, and there's not anything wrong with this. We all do have these, but what you've probably noticed is that you have to adjust these in some cases as well. Also, solutions for confused negotiator. A lot of times the confused negotiator, they don't understand it all, so they need visual aids. proposal in writing, needs to be short, clear, step-by-step agenda. They involve maybe a third party to review some of the issues because they don't want to get caught on something because they don't know what's happening. Solutions for the indecisive could be you go slowly, you go methodical, you review the issues, allow extra time for the person to consult other people, present the issue in a fresh and original way, because once again, they're indecisive. So you're trying to make sure they've got enough information to make the decision. Solution for the aggressive negotiator: you have to stay calm. Somebody's got to keep their head in this thing. And it's sometimes difficult because you're thinking, oh my gosh. So avoid the emotional language. A lot of times this is accusatory. They're making accusations that aren't true and stuff. Reiterate the facts. You feel like the Dragnet people. If you remember Sergeant Friday on Dragnet, the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And you're going back to the facts. The facts are this, this, and this. We don't know. We are afraid all this stuff could happen, but we don't know that. And so you're trying to make sure you're not drawn into a battle, and that you don't allow them to intimidate, you don't allow them to bully you or any of those things. And then a lot of times just taking a break in the middle of something when it starts kind of crescendoing, or kind of feels like it's really getting up there, so that the negotiation or the tempers can cool. Now, don't say let's take a break so our tempers can cool, because that's like throwing gas on it sometimes. Just say, why don't we take a quick break, bio break, and let everybody grab something to drink for 10 minutes. And a lot of times that will just calm that situation. And then your last one here, your emotional negotiator, do not challenge his or her motives or integrity. Don't interrupt the outbursts. A lot of times they'll do a lot of different things. Respond to any emotional outbursts with rational questions. And then you can take a break if somebody is really upset over something like this. And so I've not seen the emotional one as much in the workplace as I have personally. You'll see and hear people say that they were negotiating to buy a new house, and the person was an emotional negotiator. My son, when he bought his house, he told me that what he paid, and he and I had already talked about the price range, and he told me what he paid, and he said that she was telling him about how her husband had cancer and probably didn't have long to live. Now, that's an example of where she was softening him up, I think, because once again, you're negotiating with them. They're selling their house because the husband has cancer, and they need to get rid of their house so that they can have the money for cancer treatments. But that would be a very emotional thing and that could have been why my son paid more for his house than what I thought he should have, is because they got him emotional with that thing. Now let's look at some general questions real quick here. So if you're going to be negotiating, I'm talking about an actual negotiation with your vendor or with your customer, depending on what it is, it could be much bigger than what we've talked about so far this morning. Okay. So one of the things, who's going to participate? What do I specifically want? When this meeting's over with, what am I wanting here? What is my strategy going in here because of what I know about my customer or these people? What are the hot buttons? What am I expecting them to think is a hot button? What are my hot buttons? And what amount of authority do I really have to make this decision? That's going to change the dynamics of some things. And so the point is, all of these kind of give you the structure of what you're going to walk in and out with in those situations. Now let's evaluate decisions and solutions without bias. Let's talk about that for a moment. This was a great article put out by Harvard Business Review, and it was talking about pre-mortem. And so we know what a post-mortem is, or lessons learned. We do those in projects. If you're doing Agile or Scrum, you're doing retrospectives. This is a pre-mortem. I thought this was excellent. And this is what Harvard Business Review said. You imagine a future failure and then explain the cause. They said, this technique, also called prospective hindsight, helps you identify potential problems that ordinary foresight won't bring to mind. If you're a manager at an international retailer, you might say, let's assume it's 2025 and our Chinese outlets have lost money every year since 2025. Why has this happened? So what he's talking about here is an activity that would benefit us before the negotiation. So what you're doing is a pre-mortem. What could go wrong with the negotiation? What is my customer going to want? What could happen if the customer gets everything that they're wanting in this area? What could happen to our project? Or what could happen to our team with all the pressures? I just thought it was a different perspective, and it's something for us to be able to think about. So when we talk about making those decisions, this is a basic decision-making process I want you to see. You identify the problem, collect information, identify the alternatives, weigh the evidence, choose from the alternatives, implement the action, and then you evaluate the results. And so this is what we do when we talk about a decision-making process. And most of us follow some type of step process like this in most of our stuff. And this can happen like literally within seconds on a decision, because some of the decisions we do, we make them very quick. And so the point is, though, is that we're making them too quick. Like, for an example, before we've weighed the evidence or identified the alternatives, there might be an alternative out here that we need to go back and reconsider, but that we did not consider in the beginning phases. And that could take us into, we didn't consider it because we had bias toward it. Could be a lack of knowledge, but could be bias. And so types of bias, magnifying a success over a failure. I've sat in meetings and seen people who focus so much on the failures that they didn't focus on the successes out here. All they talked about was failures from previous projects. And so that can be a concern. You can pre-program your people to think that every project's going to fail, and they're not going to. Picking only information which supports a decision, either positive or negative, and we see that. Putting more importance on personal work than the work of others based on what you do compared to what your team does. It's a team effort in most of these projects. Allowing the first impression to dominate one's ideas. We do this a lot of times. If you like the vendor, then what happens is you think more positive of the vendor. If you don't like the vendor, have you ever noticed that what happens is that you have a tendency to be skeptical? All your meetings are kind of crusty, because you maybe don't like that person. And the thing is, being able to set those aside, we all agree we're supposed to do that. Sometimes it's hard to set that aside because their personality is what frustrates you, and yet that they are their personality representing that vendor. So sometimes trying to put that personality aside is a little bit of a challenge. So here's some ways to avoid the bias in our decision making. So all these things contribute, obviously. Try not to make the decision super fast. Now, super fast, sometimes in a crisis, it doesn't matter. You've got to make a decision fast. But I'm talking about some of the normal decisions that we've got a little bit of time to work with. Do that. Do not make decisions without data. And now there's all kind of range of how much data you can get. You've got to have enough data to help you make the decision. And sometimes we want more data, but the point is your time's run out. Don't choose a decision because the outcome is available. A lot of times, because we know what this outcome is, there might be some other outcomes, but we have not anticipated that, or we don't know what the alternatives are. So just because I have one outcome does not mean that is the right outcome or the outcome. And then evaluate the decisions and solutions without bias. And a couple of things to consider is check one's own bias on a specific solution or idea chosen. We are biased on certain things, obviously, because of our experiences, our education, our value system. We are biased on some stuff. But that doesn't mean we have to be mean-spirited. It doesn't mean we have to be mean to other people. But we do have some biases on some things. Look at the ideas of others as from a positive rather than negative viewpoint. Can I see a positive in what they're recommending? And then challenge any type of personal stereotype, evaluating each person on individual contributions to the discussion, solution, the idea. You're looking at what they brought to the table that was positive. And then seek ways to personally improve. How can I be better? How can I be more open? How can I be more open to the ideas of others? If you're somebody who really likes your ideas, that might be a bias. Your idea is better than anybody else's, and you kind of walk in the room like that. You've got to be open to some of the others. And so that's a bias that's going to have to be looked at. And it's that idea of inclusiveness, the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities, resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those having physical or intellectual disabilities or belonging to other minority groups. Now, let's talk for just a moment, inclusiveness. We do things that we don't mean to do. Now, many of you have heard me speak. Have heard me speak about my sister. I have a sister who's mentally ill. She has disorganized schizophrenia, and I'm her conservator. And so I have to sign for her for things. And this happened many years ago, but she was at the hospital and I was sitting there next to her. And so the nurse came in to talk with her, and the nurse raised her voice when she talked with her. "How are you doing today, honey?" And I said, "Ma'am, she don't have any problem hearing. She's mentally ill." And so the nurse said, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry." And I'm thinking, there you go. There was a good example of what a bias was. Because she's mentally ill, she picked up her voice and made her voice louder as if she was hard of hearing. And so anyway, my sister and I started laughing about this. Okay. And so another nurse came in later that day and did the exact same thing. And my sister started saying stuff, and I told her to hush, and then we had a big laugh over it. But the point is, their mindset when they walked in with a mentally ill person was like she was dealing with an older person, was really what it was, someone who was hard of hearing. And that's why I said, she didn't have any problem hearing you at all. I mean, she hears voices and hears visions. That's her problem. So she can hear you from across the room. But you'll have people who walk in with that level of bias. Now, let me stop for just a moment and give you an opportunity to ask a question. Then I want to tell you about some couple of things that we're going to be doing, and tell you about something that I'm pretty excited about that we have just locked in for March that I'm excited about. So any questions on this? Let me open this up where I can see you guys, and then I'll tell you about these last three things. Questions from anybody about some of this with negotiation and change orders? All right, let me go back and show you a couple of things here, and then I want to tell you about something that's happening that's going to be pretty cool, I think. First off, let's take a look at, there we go. All right. So in February, our February webinar is going to be creating a team charter, creating a tool which gives structure, accountability for team interaction. So a team charter is different than project charter, as you already know. And so we're going to be talking about that next month. And on February 10th, we're going to be doing that from 10 to 11. And so that's going to be next month's webinar. Virtual PMP boot camps. We have 3 more for the year, February, April, and June. We also are still doing our free mastermind group. We have 30 plus people in a mastermind group this week, and so they're finishing that up. Now, if you don't have your PMP, that's what this is designed for, to help you fill out your application, and we give 1 free PMP scholarship away every time we do one of these. So tomorrow, a person will be chosen at random and given a free free scholarship to come to one of the boot camps. Now, let me tell you something to be thinking about, praying about for us, because I'm excited, but we'll see what happens. We've all heard and have spent time hearing on the news about Ukraine and everything being blown up in Ukraine. And over the last year, I've been tore up over it. But what do? You just feel for people who are in some of these situations. And so anyway, I decided to try to do something about it. And so I got on LinkedIn and I found the PMP chapter in Ukraine, made contact with the head of it. And so we are going to be providing training for Ukrainian project managers so that they're trained up and ready to go for recovery efforts when all of this stuff stops. And so I wasn't sure what the response would be. I wasn't sure how any of that was going to happen. And, I'm a little 5-person company. I mean, so you got all these things going, but I thought, okay, thinking about it does not accomplish anything. What can I do? And so I've met a group of the people over there. They only have 1 chapter in the country. And so this is the PMI chapter, about 3,000 members. And so we're going to be doing this. And so in March, we're going to be doing our first 2-day seminar talking about setting up your PMO, because they'll be setting those up with companies across there. And then we're going to be doing 6 or 8 days of training this year. And so I've already got another buddy of mine who is a leadership specialist, who's actually going to be doing leadership and project management a couple of days over there. And so you're doing it all pro bono as we do something like this, because obviously they're in a war zone. They don't have money and they're not working in most cases. And so we're ecstatic about it. And so anyway, you'll probably be seeing some different things maybe come out in newsletter or something else about that. But anyway, so I'm ecstatic to be able to do this. And so, and they're shocked that anybody over here is wanting to do anything to just try to help them and put it together. And of course, all of us have that same philosophy of trying to give something back. And I know many of you do that with other stuff too. But I just thought this would be something that to be able to help them. And so we'll see how it goes. I mean, they might think, man, I'm dumb as a brick. That country wacko doesn't know anything about project management. That might be the end result of this whole thing. But we're going to see if we can help them to some extent to be able to be ready to rebuild once the war effort is all over there. So last minute questions from anybody before I get you guys out of here. thank you so much for being on. Thank you so much for being on with us this morning. The video links will go out to everybody, so you'll have an opportunity to show it to anybody you'd like. And then also, of course, they're always posted on our website, so you can look at any past webinar you'd like on the website. Okay. All right. Well, listen, look, you guys have a great week. God bless you guys, and y'all stay safe. Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a good week.
Thanks, Keith. Have a good one.